This week we're going to start out by talking about nutrients and nutrition. And then the rest of the week we'll be covering the GI system, which is important for the processing of the nutrients and energy that we take in. Metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical processes that occur inside the body. And nutrients are the elements and compounds needed for these processes that develop energy, are responsible for repair and for growth in tissues. Calories is a way of measuring the energy value of foods. And it's actually, when we talk about, if you look at the side of a box of Cheerios, for example, it'll say that a cup of Cheerios is approximately 90 calories. Actually, in the physics idea of that, those are actually kilocalories, or 9,000 calories. The physics definition of a calorie is the amount of heat required to raise 1 gram of water 1 degree centigrade. And so if it says 90 calories for a cup of Cheerios, then that's actually 90 kilocalories or 90,000 calories, or enough heat to raise 90,000 grams of water 1 degree, and so forth. And so when we talk about calories, and you'll run into calories when you get into physics, the calories there are different than the nutrition calories by a factor of 1,000. The calories are stored. If the body eats more calories than it needs, then those calories are stored in the fat cells, or the adipose cells, which stores the excess energy for future use. And if you get too much in the way of fat cells, you develop a problem known as obesity. And obesity is defined as a body mass index of greater than 30. A body mass index is calculated based not only on your weight, but your height. Now, macronutrients are nutrients or foods that are needed in relatively, and the key word there is relatively large amounts. The three macronutrients that we talk about are carbohydrates or carbs, proteins, and fats, which are required in gram quantities. Micronutrients, on the other hand, are foods that are needed in a relatively small amount. Examples of these are vitamins and minerals, and these are usually required in milligram amounts. Carbohydrates are the source of energy. Carbohydrates means that there's primarily carbon and hydrogen make up a carbohydrate. Things like sugar, starch, those sorts of things are what we talk about when we talk about carbohydrates. The simple carbohydrates are single sugar molecules like glucose and fructose, or two sugars linked together, also known as a disaccharide. One that you're probably aware of is lactose, which is what's called milk sugar because it's found in milk. Complex carbohydrates are chains of simple sugars or chains of disaccharides, and the most common of these is starch or amylose. Proteins are the second macronutrient, and proteins are chains of amino acids. The amino acids are simple acids that are found in the body, and the proteins have multiple functions. Amino acids are the simple molecules that make up proteins, and as I said, the amino acid is made up of amino group and a carboxylic acid group with a side chain, and the side chain is what differentiates the various amino acids. And these amino acids are linked together in long chains by means of peptide bonds and make up proteins. Fats are the third macronutrient, and fats are also called lipids. They are groups of compounds that are insoluble in water and are used for energy storage. Fats are generally made up of chains of what's known as triglycerides. This is the glycerin molecule with side chains of carbons and hydrogens. And when they have three side chains, that is tri or three side chains, then they're called triglycerides. Cholesterol is another fat that is in the body, and this is used by the body to make several important hormones and other compounds. Now, probably one of the most important molecules in the body is something called ATP. And the best way to think about ATP is to think in terms of currency. Currency is money, and money is exchanged for work and is exchanged for goods. So a person goes out and works and they make money, and then they take that money and they spend it for goods. ATP is like money. And so when food comes in, food is converted into ATP. And so food, the food is like the work that's converted into money. So food is converted into ATP, and then the ATP is transported to the energy where energy is needed, and then it's transferred into energy, which is like a person using their money to buy something. And so here's the process where the molecules are broken down and they are made into foodstuffs, and then these go through a reaction that eventually occurs in the mitochondria and produces ATP. Then ATP goes to these various sites where energy is required. The phosphorus is broken off here, and that produces energy. And then you have ADP with a D plus phosphorus. Then it comes back, and then energy is taken from food, and it makes it back into ATP. The ATP comes out and then makes energy again. And the energy is used again to power various processes. Micronutrients, as I said, are nutrients that are required in small amounts. One important micronutrient is vitamins. Vitamins are organic, keyword organic substances that are important for metabolism. There are water-soluble vitamins. The B-complex vitamins and C are water-soluble, which means they dissolve in water. And you cannot overdose on water-soluble vitamins because they dissolve in water and then they're excreted in the urine. And then there's the fat-soluble vitamins. The fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. Fat-soluble vitamins will not dissolve in water. They have to be dissolved in fat, and they're absorbed in the fat when fat is absorbed into the body. You can overdose on fat-soluble vitamins because they're not easily excreted. Vitamins function as coenzymes, and coenzymes are molecules that are necessary for enzymes, which are proteins that speed reactions. They work together with coenzymes in order to function. Also, vitamins can act as antioxidants. An antioxidant is the substance that neutralizes something called a free radical or an oxidant. A free radical is something that's produced by metabolism that can damage cells. Minerals are the other micronutrients, and minerals are just what it sounds like. They're inorganic compounds that work with organic compounds as foodstuffs. One example is cobalt, which is a mineral that acts in the vitamin B12 in order for B12 to work. The trace elements, or minerals, are called trace, but because you don't require very much of these in order to fulfill your requirements. And these are things like iron, which is found in hemoglobin in the blood, magnesium, and as I said, cobalt. The other nutrient that people don't think about very often is water. The body is made up of 60 to 65% water. Inside the cells there is water. Outside the cells there is water, which makes up the large portion of both plasma and lymph fluid. And when water is not absorbed or escapes from the blood vessels, it causes something called edema, which is excess unabsorbed water. Now we're going to move on to how the foodstuffs are processed. And this is processed by something known as the alimentary canal. The alimentary canal is a tube essentially a tube that leads from the mouth to the anus, and its purpose, and it contains all the digestive organs, and its purpose is threefold: digestion, absorption, and elimination. Digestion is the changing of large molecules of food into smaller, simpler molecules. Absorption is when those smaller, simpler molecules are taken from the inside of the tube into the bloodstream. And then elimination is the removal of everything that goes through the tube and is not absorbed. Digestion is a chemical process. Digestion begins to occur in the mouth and occurs primarily in the upper part of the GI tract down to approximately the mid portion of the small intestine. Peristalsis acts on food after it's swallowed to propel it through the GI tract. And so peristalsis is an important part of the muscular action of the GI tract. Peristalsis is one of those muscular functions that is involuntary and smooth muscle. Bile, which comes from the liver, enters the GI tract, and its primary purpose is the breakdown of fats, and it acts like a soap in order to break it down. And then there are enzymes that are excreted in the stomach, by the pancreas and small intestine, that go through the process of breaking down the food. They speed the reaction process of breaking down the food. And so these proteins that speed this down help break down foodstuff. An example of this is lactase, which is an enzyme that works on lactose, which I told you before is milk sugar, and it works to break the lactose molecule, which is two sugars bound together. It breaks those two sugars in half into single sugar molecules which can be absorbed. We'll start at the oral cavity, which is where the digestive process starts. The oral cavity is the mouth, and this is where, as I said, digestion begins. In the mouth, there's mucus, and this mucus is a slimy substance that keeps the oral cavity moist and allows for the sliding of the tissues across each other without discomfort. The palate, which is right here, is important, and it's for two reasons. One is it separates the oral cavity where food goes in from the nasal cavity where air comes into the body. And if you have a hole there, obviously you would end up with food in your nose, which is not a very good thing. The second thing that the palate does is the tongue presses food up against the palate, and the palate is like a place where you mash the food against so that it helps in digestion. And then when you swallow, the tongue presses it again up against the palate and forces it down into the stomach. The tongue is used for multiple things, including speaking, but it pushes the food into the teeth, mixes the food with saliva, which is a digestive juice, and then at the end it is in the process of swallowing. And each bit of food, once it begins to be digested, is balled up into a ball called a bolus, and this is when the digestive process has begun. Now, as I said, saliva is a salivary product. The salivary gland produces this digestive juice. It contains primarily amylase. Amylase is an enzyme that breaks down amylose. Amylose is a complex carbohydrate, and so when amylase works on it, it breaks down the complex chains of sugar molecules into simpler and simpler chains so that they can continue to be broken up until they can be absorbed. And this juice breaks this down, this carbohydrate down. And one thing that's kind of interesting if you want to do it is you can take a carbohydrate, say a cracker, and chew it up and then spit it into a glass, and you'll notice that the cracker itself has changed in terms of its composition. Whereas if you take a piece of meat, which is totally protein, which amylase will have no effect on, and you chew that up and spit it into a glass, you'll notice that it hasn't changed its fundamental character. And then there are the salivary amylase. Well, there's salivary amylase And then there's also pancreatic amylase, which is what's distinguished here.